மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.
After seeing so many nice examples in which the light pieces prevailed against the queen, it's time to go to the real business and to see some games in which the queen is actually doing the job. Actually, in most of the cases, it is the queen which is slightly better than the bishop, the pawn, and the rook, or the knight. Like I told you at the beginning, it is considered to be relatively, approximately equal if in the Lasker compensation one of the sides is having a bishop, and slightly worse when having the knight. But in reality, in most of the cases, it is the queen which is somewhat better, especially if the board is open and there are chances for the queen to create attacks on either flank, like it was in the following example: Kramnik with the white pieces against Shirov from the tournament in Hugeven 1999. Knight f3, knight f6, c4, g6. What have started as an English opening turned out to be a Greenfield defense after that. Knight takes c3, b takes c3. Now c5, actually c5 was played on move number 2, but okay, this is not so important. We're still in the same position. Bishop to g7, bishop b5 check, knight c6, castles, took on d4, castles, bishop b3, bishop g4. That was something that Kramnik prepared especially against Shirov in this game. And the other Greenfield specialists at that time, he took on c6 and he played rook c1, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, and bishop takes d4. And by that time, in 1999, this position was considered to be innocuous and rather harmless for black. After the fourth sequence of moves, rook f d1, c5, actually Kramnik considered the move e5 to be the right one here, even though white has slightly better position after that. Rook takes c5, bishop takes e3, rook takes d8. People were usually going into this endgame, and they thought that it is good enough for black to defend it, that there is a great chance for the second player to create a fortress. Kramnik proved that this is not precisely like that, and he virtually put this line into the archives with the next move, queen c3. A very strong move which is spoiling the coordination between the black pieces and makes it impossible for him to hold both the flanks. Now on first sight it seems to be a bit illogical, as rook c8 is creating a threat of bishop takes f2, and then why do we play with the queen on c3 is the logical question, but Kramnik has something on his mind. I would just end that in this situation rook d8 has been seen later against the same Kramnik, and this was the last game in the line. It was a blitz game. Gary Kimovich Kasparov tried it against Kramnik, but without much success. After king f1, bishop d4, queen came to c7, bishop b6, Kramnik won the pawn on e7, and rook d2 was answered with queen e8. Actually, this is the course of the game, Tashnik against Ivanchuk, but here white could have played f4 instead, and after rook f2 check, king e1, and rook takes f4. After this checks, the rook will have to step on a pin, and white is most likely winning after g4 followed by h4 and g5. I can hardly see a way for black to prevent losing his rook. On the other hand, instead of bishop d4, bishop b6 was the course of the game that I have mentioned. Kramnik against Kasparov, which continued a4, e6, a5, bishop d4. It's important to kick away the bishop from the good square on b6 from the stable position. And after rook f8 and e5, Kramnik achieved what he wanted to. He has clear edge. Then he brought the king into the center and started advancing his pawns on the king side, and he went on to win this game as well. Back to the game that is of an interest at the moment. After rook c8, Kramnik played, of course, king to f1, rook c7, and he improved, just like in the game against Kasparov, he improved the a pawn. First of all, this pawn is taking away the heir from the bishop. The pawn is moving on a5, and it can even go further on a6. This might be a future queen, who knows. Shirov reacted with bishop b6, because in case of bishop d6, Kramnik intended to play queen a5, and if now black tries to build a fortress like that on the dark squares, he intended to play first h4, followed by g3 and f4 and e5, not allowing the bishop to stay on a safe square, and thus spoiling the coordination between these two pieces. Okay, then bishop b6. If this is not working, bishop b6 might be working, who knows. Well, then the problem is that after queen to e5, which is again very strong, the threat is a5, and once again the bishop will have to leave this stable outpost on, relatively stable, not yet stable, outpost on b6. True, in order to achieve this, white is sacrificing a pawn, and black can take it even with checks like that. But more importantly, once that the bishop is chased away, usually there is no chance for the second player to save it even. Not only to keep the coordination of the black pieces, but like it is in this particular situation, the bishop is lost as bishop d8 would be answered queen b8. Shirov played instead of rook c1, rook c2, and now we have a5. White is not distracted by the pawn on f2. For him it is important to spoil the coordination. That's a very, very nice move, very beautiful and precise one. Now in case of bishop takes b2, we see the queen power. The queen is not taking the pawn on a7, but it is giving a check, and makes use of the fact that the coordination can be spoiled to win at least the bishop, as the rook. The only square to defend the bishop is d2, but then we have queen c3 check, and one of the pieces is lost. While if instead of if bishop takes f2, if bishop c7, this time white can take on e7, as the pawn on a5 is untouchable due to another double threat check and check on e5. Once again we have the double check, the double attack idea. And also if here the rook takes on f2, then another problem there will be after king e1, bishop e3 would be answered queen takes e7, and on rook takes g2, suddenly white is creating very powerful attack on the king's flank thanks to one of his last remaining pawns, the one on e6. e6 will follow, the king will be discovered, and once that the king is discovered, you know what happens. Plenty of checks, which will end in a double attack, and white is going to win either the rook or the bishop, or maybe both of them. Finally, in this line, if instead of taking on e3, black takes on g2, then the problem is ab6, queen takes e7, and again this pawn is untouchable because of the double attack, while if he cannot take this pawn, there is no fortress for sure in that particular situation. Okay, this all didn't happen in the game. On move number 23, black played bishop c5 instead, to which the pawn is moving now on f4, and white is preparing strong attack on the king side. e6 was met with g4, and once again white is playing on two flanks. First of all, he played on the queen side, advancing the pawn and making the bishop on c5 a vulnerable piece. Thus he prevented this rook from being too active and taking pawns along the second rank, as he had always to defend the bishop. And now he is moving on the other side, and he is searching the second weakness. The second weakness is going to be the king on g8. Rook c4, queen c7, using the pin. And in case of king g7, now he intends to go g5, and after that to improve the king. While h6, which was played in the game, was answered with f5, and little by little white is approaching the enemy king G5, G takes F5, E takes F5, E takes F5. Black's defense is already impossible. In the game he tried F6. This is obviously weakening the king, but what else can he do? If he goes Rook C2, then F6 would be the answer, and this check would be replied with King E1. There is no fortress after Rook takes, Queen takes, as in case of A6. White is first of all going to improve his pieces, his pawns on the king side, his king as well. So the king is moving further. King G8, King F4, King G7. There is nothing that black can do. He is hoping that this is a fortress, but most likely it is not. Queen D4 check. King to G8, H5, King to H7. King is moving on F5, King G8, Queen D5. And once that our pawns have reached the 5th rank, and they have been activated to the maximum, we're using another typical idea in situations like that to break the fortress. This is the sacrifice of the queen. Queen takes C6, and this is a won position for white. One endgame. You can check it for yourselves if you like. On move number 29, if instead of Rook C2 black plays King G7, then the problem is Queen E5 check, King G8, F6, and the pawn is creating mating threats. If the bishop is defending the king from this side, then there will be check on G3 and Queen B8, once again restoring the attack on the queen side, not only on the king's one. Playing for 2 flanks and playing for double attacks always is the correct thing for white to do. Finally, what happened in the game was F6. And after F6, Queen G3 check was played, King F8, Queen is coming on the weakened G6 square at once, Bishop D4, one pawn goes down, King E7, Queen F4, probably not the only winning move. H4 is also good enough to win, and the pawn that has been won, the H1, is deciding the issue. It's decisive factor in the game. King D6, H5, Rook A1 check, King E2, Bishop E5, Queen B4 check, King is going on D5, Queen B7 check, King C4, H6, Rook A2 check, King F3, and Shirov resigned here. There is no way for him to stop the pawn. It is approaching H7, then the queen goes to G8 or G7, and that would be the end of it. So whenever you're having a good queen, in order to avoid fortresses, you need to play on both flanks. You need to play for 2 weaknesses. First of all, you need to break the comfortable setup of the opponent's pieces. It doesn't matter if he has a bishop or a knight. You want to take away the square from where it is defending everything. And after that, you start to play first on one side, then on the other. But you're trying to combine the things in order to open the king and to start creating successful double attacks. This is the main idea for the player with the queen.
மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.